All right, so we are doing the second Healing Starts Here session on burnout. Greg Malone is going to be presenting again today, and we are just grateful that you're presenting, Greg. The last session was so good.
Well, I'm glad to be here. So as Sarah said, yeah, we're going to talk about burnout today. And I'd like to talk about burnout first, kind of why it happens, and then maybe talk about a way for that not to happen, and kind of a way out of feeling burnout all the time. So the first thing that I'd like to do is share my screen. So I am going to get my presentation here. All right. So I don't know about you, but burnout is a thing that happens. Um, share now. Got it. All right. So burnout. There we go. All right. So burnout, what is burnout? I think burnout really happens a lot for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons it can happen is stressors that are happening in our lives. It could also happen because maybe the kind of work that we're doing is actually causing what's called secondary trauma to us. It can also happen because maybe the way we are navigating the work in terms of our empathy and bringing that to the care is also something that is impacting our ability to do the work in a sustainable way. But what I wanted to do is talk about some of the stressors that we have to navigate day in and day out. And the way I think about stressors is basically this idea of when the demands of one's own life overwhelms your coping resources. Um, and I like that definition because there's really no intentionality. It's not because we're a bad person that we can't handle all that's on our plate. It means that really our plate is so overwhelmed and stuff is falling off that plate, that's when burnout happens. So our coping mechanisms, our coping resources aren't able to handle all that life is throwing at us. And I don't know about you, but right now during COVID, it feels like a lot is being thrown at me. And so what I wanted to do is kind of ask, what kind of stressors come to mind for you? This could be stuff at work. This could be like personal stressors. This could be like some of the big global stressors that we've talked about, like COVID and other things. But Sarah, for you, what kinds of stressors come to mind when you think about having to navigate life?
Yeah, when I think about like really stressful situations that I've been in or things that add stress to my life, I think about like something that kind of like throws me out of my routine, like if family's in town visiting. My parents were just in town recently, so that was kind of like it threw me out of my routine, so I found that pretty stressful. And I mean, work is very stressful, depending on my patient assignment and how I'm feeling about like the patients that I'm interacting with that day, or their family members. That is like very stressful. Um, and then I'm trying to think of um, when I I just thought of one other one. When really, I mean, anything that is oh, we'd talked about moving before. Like moving is pretty stressful, or if you're worried about like some major like financial decision that you have to make, or I know for me, if I'm like fighting with my boyfriend or something, that adds stress, and like then I don't sleep well, and it's just it can be a lot if all of that's happening at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you said stuff about like something like getting out of your routine. You mentioned stuff at work and like maybe being assigned a particular patient who is just a stressful patient to work with. You know, you mentioned things like the financial stressors. You mentioned the things of like moving. You know, there's a lot of people that are moving right now during COVID. And then like even just relationship difficulties, you know, the things that come to my mind for myself are just navigating like coded and like you know, it's changed the way my wife and I are having relationships with people, and you don't feel like you can quite so freely hang out with people as much as you would like to. um, and it just has added this whole other layer of stress onto that. I'm actually in the process of moving myself, and the house is just chaos right now. I mean, you know, boxes are packed, and like, you know, I have a laptop sitting on a box, and that is my desk. Why? Because the desk was sold.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's just like it just nothing feels solid, you know, and so I think it's a good thing to call out, largely because all of these stressors are going to be part of life. And this is a list that I put together, and it by no means is exhaustive, but you can see that we just you and I have mentioned some of these stressors that are on this list. And if there were others on this meeting today, I suspect they could even contribute even more to this list. And so, but it's not that we can do anything necessarily about these stressors. The stressors of life are going to be there for any of us, no matter who we are. What I have found that leads to burnout is how we relate to those stressors. Um, and so that's what I want to talk about, because I think it does take us into a way out of burnout. Um, so um, before we do that, though, what I want to ask is I just kind of want to ask, like, when we're feeling burnout, what does that feel like? And I'll share my experience first. I feel kind of weary. The word that I use often with my teammates is I'm feeling crispy. Um, you know, sometimes I can wake up in the morning and I just, even though I slept fine, I'm just laying in bed and I'm like, I don't know if I want to go to work. Um, or there's also the sense of like kind of feeling more removed from the work and like, you know, feeling sort of numb to it, I guess, to where you just kind of start going through life in this sort of checked out place, if that makes sense. And sometimes that can happen for me. And so, you know, in my body, I can feel this sort of tightness in my shoulders, you know. So you know, sometimes it shows up in my body, but that's kind of what burnout feels like for me. I'm curious to know for you, Sarah, what does burnout feel like for you?
Yeah, burnout, it feels like, I mean, you said this feeling of like I'm lying in bed in the morning and I'm just like, I don't want to go into work today. That is burnout for me. And then when I'm at work, I am it's like I put on like glasses that I can only see the negative things or something. Like every little thing just feels like yet another thing that I cannot handle. Like and it's like this feeling of like one more request and I'm gonna explode. Like someone wants something from me and like I can't do it all is what it feels like. And then it's like, and when someone comes to me like, hey, can you help me with this thing? I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I can barely even handle what I'm dealing with. And then I leave work and I'm like, what was even the point of that? Like, I didn't do anything helpful today. Like, I'm just pissed off at the world. And that's that's what it feels like for me when I'm burnt out.
Yeah, no, it's almost like, you have this whole pile of straws that are on your back, and like you go to work and there's one more straw and it's like, really? Are
Yeah.
you kidding me? And it's just like, I don't want any more straws. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, totally. Yes, this is unfortunately a very, yes, I've been here.
Right.
So, which I think what I appreciate about that is like, this feels like a very sort of normal experience.
Yeah.
And I think some of this, we just talked a little bit about some of these things, this sense of just emotional exhaustion, one more straw, are you kidding me? And like a low sense of personal accomplishment. You said coming home and you're like, I don't even really know what good any of that did today. Or the depersonalization, that kind of numbingness that happens that I mentioned. And so I think some of this is actually part of the landscape of being a caregiver. That is somebody who's in a role where you're caring for other people. I just want to call out that I think burnout happens because we often are in a line of work where we want to help people. In other words, there's a part of burnout that actually happens from a very good place. And that is to mean from this altruistic place of like, we got into this work with a sense of mission, a sense of purpose, and a real strong desire to help others. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we can go into the work and go into life still staying grounded. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what that means. So, um, having said that, I think there's a good root to this sort of burnout in terms of coming from a good place of altruism. Sometimes I think the altruism can get kind of in our way. And this is what I mean by this. I was doing some research about empathy, because one of the things that we do as caregivers to be really good caregivers and to care for others in that altruistic way is we're very empathetic. That's what makes us good at our jobs, right? Um, but what I've been doing is I've been doing some research on empathy. And I found some research that actually shows that the same parts of the brain that are activated when we are going through our own emotional pain, just our own personal emotional pain, those same parts are activated when we are empathetic toward another person. So look at these two side by side. You see that the empathy there on that part, shows that the two parts are activated there. And the very same, it's kind of a mirror image that we're looking at. The very same areas are activated when we're in our own personal emotional pain. Um, and so what that tells me is, it tells me, um, you know, that part of the issue is that the way we care for people and we are empathetic actually potentially can cause what's called empathic distress. In other words, it's the phenomenon of not just bearing witness to somebody, not just saying, I see the pain and I feel that pain that you're in, and I can tell it's painful for you. It's not just bearing witness, but it's literally this phenomenon of taking it on for yourself. Um, which then when you get in your car at the end of the day, you can feel that you actually took it on. You literally get in your car and you feel heavier. So some of you might be thinking, maybe Sarah, you're thinking this right now. Well, Greg, are you telling me that as a nurse that I should just not care?
Right. Yeah. That kind of
Right?
sounding like what you're saying a little bit.
I'm like, yeah. So it's like, don't even be empathetic. Just, go to your patient and say, look, buddy, this is
Yeah.
how it is, and just deal with it. Right.
Yeah.
That would probably not make you a very good nurse, I'm going to bet.
No, no. I will say I feel like saying that sometimes, but I don't.
Right. I know. And there's a part of us that'd be like, that'd be a much easier way to do the job.
Right.
But you and I know you'd probably get thrown out of some rooms, which wouldn't go over too well. Right. And the other piece is like, you got into the work because you really care.
Yeah.
And it's not, so there's got to be another way to do the work. And so this is what I want to talk about is how do we have empathy in a way, what do we do with our empathy that will impact burnout? And so if we look at the slide here, we can see that actually the answer lies in what is called compassion. I think a lot of people think compassion is empathy, and it's actually not. And even when you look at brain scans, when somebody is being compassionate, the red dots on this slide, they actually represent what parts of the brain get activated when somebody is being compassionate. And if you look at those parts, it's completely different area of the brain than empathy and the pain receptors. And so I think what I want to kind of wonder about is the answer for being empathetic is the answer in compassion. And because both start off with empathy, one leads to empathic distress, or we can start off with empathy and move that into compassion. And so I'm just kind of wondering, Sarah, how do you think that lands with you, just even when you hear that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of it. I love the idea that, okay, when I'm empathetic, that's when I'm relating to and in fact experiencing my patient's pain. But when I'm compassionate, it's when I'm acknowledging their pain as opposed to experiencing their pain. I think that for me, even just growing up, and then also when I decided to become a nurse and was trained to be a nurse, the way I was taught to care for people was to be empathetic and like to experience that pain. And I think I want to know like what I can do or what I can like think or say, or what are the things that I need to practice to transition from I'm feeling your pain with you to I see your pain and I acknowledge your pain.
It's a
Because
great,
those are the tools that I don't have.
Right. And I so appreciate you calling out that, like, for a lot of nurses, this is how they were trained to care.
Yeah.
And there can feel almost a sense of like, I'm not being a good nurse if I don't take it all on,
Right.
too.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So to your question, then what do you do? Like, what's the other way?
Right.
I mean, how can I go about it differently? If it activates different parts of the brain, and I don't want to go in that place of empathic distress because basically I'm just reactivating all this pain area. What do you do? So I think it's a great question. And there's several things you can do. The first thing you can do is before you even go into the patient's room, you could say to yourself, what is going to happen in this room is going to be two things, my experience and their experience. And so I want to listen to their experience, but it's okay if I have a different experience myself. So what you can do is you can kind of, before you even go into the room and when you come out of the room, you can kind of check in with yourself and you can say, whose pain am I really feeling? Did I just walk out of that patient's room and I just shouldered all that they just said to me, or the grimacing, or the, the tears? Am I internalizing that? Did I just take that all in and now I'm shouldering it?
Yeah.
And listening to that when you do that. So that's one thing, because the reason why I say that is because compassion is other centered.
Yeah.
Right? Empathy tends to be more and more about yourself. And empathic distress is definitely about yourself. But compassion is, my role is to bear witness to that person's pain. I don't have to take it all on, right? So that's the first thing you can do. You can check in with yourself about that. The second thing you can do is, as you're ending your day, or as you're going throughout your day, kind of ask yourself, see if you leave your work feeling more weighted down, tightened, weary. Like, check in with your body. I know we've talked about this in the last session, this thing of awareness and like growing that awareness muscle, and like really asking yourself, do I feel tight in my chest? Does my stomach feel kind of queasy, or do I feel a tightness in my shoulders? Or, whatever it is, do I feel jittery? And the reason why I say that is because if you do feel more weighted down, if you do find that you're having this sort of somatic taking in of all this energy and the pain that going on with your patient, if you're doing that, that is a place of empathic distress. And it means that you're not really operating out of a place of compassion, because compassion will leave you feeling refreshed and relaxed. And it will leave you feeling like you have more gas in the tank, if that makes sense. If you're getting into your car at the end of the day and it feels like, Greg, I don't have any more gas in the tank, then I would say, let's think about your stance with work and how you're approaching even the patient care that you're doing. Do you bear witness to it, or, have you taken on some stuff today? I don't know. How does that land with you when I say that in terms of those two strategies, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. I think that that it's kind of I'm trying to get in, like, really recognize like what I'm feeling about that. It's it's hard. It's really difficult to do that, is what I have found. Is that, you know, um when the habit that I've built over like 5 years or however long anyone else's career has been is to go in and like take what the patient's saying personally, or maybe take what the patient family member is saying, and to like take it on. Or because for me, what I do, if I'm not in a place where I can take it on, I just shut down. Like I don't acknowledge the pain, or I just kind of like feel numb to it. Like a family member telling me like, oh, they're like, I know what's going on with their like significant other who's in the hospital, but then they also have a kid who's struggling in school and she can't make it to like drive him to school, or now, teach at home. And it's like I don't even like, I don't know, it's hard to relate to that emotion when I'm not being empathetic. And I think Greg, you can say if this is accurate or not, from some of the stuff that I've read about compassion, it's like some of the things that you can say, even if you're maybe not feeling compassionate in that moment, you can say like, that sounds really difficult. Or like that seems really hard. And like the season sounds really difficult for you. And um I think practicing compassion, it really is a practice, you know. It's something that like empathy has been drilled into nurses for so long, and it's breaking a habit is what it is. And I mean, I couldn't agree more, right? Like this, what you're saying makes so much sense that like if I can just if I can just go into the patient's room and say it's one of these situations where I'm not happy, or I'm not even happy, but I'm feeling conflicted about the patient's care. It's an elderly patient. I think that our medical endeavors are futile, and when we're turning the patient, when we're doing a bronch, it's painful for the patient. I see that.
Yeah.
And as opposed to, I think it's taking that moment maybe after the bronch that that like you choose to stop, and whether it's like when you're washing your hands or you're sitting at the desk, you're about to start charting and you're waiting for Epic to load or something. Like choosing to say that the patient's experience is difficult and my experience is different. Like, and the truth of the matter is like, it's okay to acknowledge that, you know, when you are in one of these situations where the you feel like medical intervention is futile, like it's okay to acknowledge that that's hard for you too. I think that's the piece that we miss of like acknowledging like I I can have compassion on myself too and have compassion for the patient, and there's enough to go around. And this is like that's what your slide is saying, like compassion is limitless, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just kind of what's going through my mind.
No, I love that you say that, and I like that you brought up some of the stressors that we go through as caregivers is even the moral distress, where
Yeah.
the patient's plan of care it doesn't feel good to be a participant in that plan of care,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it can make you feel at odds with some of your own values. But I think to your point, I think, you know, maybe while washing your hands after you've been in the room, you can kind of say to yourself, you know, it's okay that I'm in a different space emotionally than my patient is in,
Yeah.
or it's okay that I think differently about this plan of care, even though I'm participating in the plan of care. It's okay for me to participate. I mean, you know, I do got to follow the doctor's orders, right? But it's okay to be in a different space with that. Um, and I don't know if we always give ourselves that kind of permission.
Yeah.
I think there can be this sort of implicit understanding that to 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 really be a good caregiver, a really good nurse, I need to be all in.
Right.
And the problem with that is when we go all in, we actually lose who we are in that,
Yeah.
right? And so there ends up becoming this thing where you're like suddenly all in, and you're like, and I don't like who I've become now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
You
that's
know?
so true. So true. And even, I mean, like, even even just allowing ourselves the permission of, you know, if like, because I think the message that I heard in nursing school and even in like at bedside training is like, if you're not okay with the medical plan of care, then you as the nurse are responsible for changing that medical plan of care. And um, it's okay to say, you know, I'm ultimately not responsible for this. Like the patient family or the patient is making these decisions, and it's okay to like let yourself off the hook. And I think that's
Yeah.
what I have a problem doing, is like stopping and saying like, you know what, you don't agree with this plan of care, and that like you have educated the patient and their family member, or even the doctor, if you feel like the doctor is the one who's maybe not in agreement with you. And just acknowledging like I've fulfilled my responsibility in this, and I can choose to have peace knowing that,
Yeah.
and allowing
Yeah.
yourself that permission. Because that's what I don't do. I'm like, no, I don't get off the hook, but you do. You should allow yourself to do that.
Absolutely. And I think what I love about that approach, Sarah, is it realistically puts you in a larger context,
Mm,
where there are parts of our jobs that we have no control over. You
right.
know, it goes back to something like the serenity prayer, which is, help me control the things I can and let go of the things that I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference,
Exactly.
right? And sometimes patients and families choose a plan of care that honestly a lot of the medical team are like, we don't think that's a good idea, but okay.
Right.
Or sometimes there's parts of the medical system that there's an inertia around plan of care.
Mm,
And not everybody on that care team are necessarily in agreement with it, but there's enough inertia to where this is what we're going to do.
right.
Um, and so, and like you say, it's a kind thing to say to yourself, I can't be responsible for all those pieces.
Yeah.
That's not my job.
Yeah.
And you can certainly advocate. You're there at rounds and you can, in the morning advocate for what you think might be the most compassionate pathway.
Right.
Um, but whether or not how that lands with the patient, how that lands with the family or the other providers, you know. So but these are some of the things that I think we can be doing. And if you notice, this looks familiar to the idea of just becoming more aware of what's going on inside of you. You would be right to draw that conclusion, because you cannot be compassionate to yourself unless you take time to become aware of what's going on inside of you.
Mm,
How do you know what to care for unless you examine what's going on inside of you? You won't know.
right.
Um, and so, but then when you work out of that place of compassion and starting off with compassion to yourself, so that you can then take a more compassionate, and I would say healthy, distant response to that patient, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where you're caring for them, you're beholding what they're going through, but you're not taking it all on.
Yeah.
So that would be my hope for you as we all try to navigate this snare of what I call empathic distress. We will be sharing a article um, out of a journal. It's a research article that talks about kind of some of the research that is being done on this topic, and it's quite a bit of it's being done right now, just because there are so many healthcare workers that are suffering from empathic distress. So I'm grateful to have been here today. Sarah, is there anything that I missed? I mean, what? No. Has this been helpful?
Yes, definitely. I'm very grateful for this material that you are presenting and that your willingness to present. I think that this is really valuable for anyone in the medical field, really in any job, but definitely any caregiver role. This is so important, and I'm just really grateful for your presenting today.
Well, you're most welcome and glad to do so.
Thank you.